I have kept the ledger of the long concern for 61 years, and in that time I have entered 41,000 completed works into it with my own hand, and not once did I expect to enter the arrival of creditors. But that is what the 11th of Marrowtide brought us, and so I set it down the way I set down everything. Plainly, in the order it happened, with the numbers where the numbers belong. The notice came before the ships did. That is proper, I suppose. A firm sends its notice ahead of its collectors, and the Sedrach, whatever else they are a firm. The notice arrived as a pressure in the deep bands of the sky, a signal folded so tight and so old that our listening arrays had to unlock it against templates 200 millennia out of use. We keep those templates. We keep everything. That is the whole of what we are. I was in the low registry on the third morning shift when the notice resolved, standing at the long window that looks out over the founding yards of Keeling Reach, and I remember the light on the yards more than I remember the alarm. It was a pale spring light, the kind that comes flat off the sea and lies along the poured stone without warming it. And under that light, the yards were doing what the yards had done every morning for longer than my people have had a continuous name for themselves. The gantries were moving. The pour lines were bright. Along the eastern arm, where the reach climbs toward the ridge in 9 tiers of foundry and hab and reservoir, a lift frame the length of a river was walking a finished truss out to the seaward face, and 100,000 people were at their stations doing the ordinary immortal work of adding one more piece to a thing that will never be finished, because it was never meant to be. Then the notice unlocked, and the duty registrar beside me, a young man named Ost, went very still and said, "Marn, you need to read this." I read it. It was a writ of escheat. I did not know the word then. I know it now because I have spent the week since learning every part of what came for us, the way you learn the shape of a debt collector's face so you will know him if he comes again. Escheat is the reverting of a property to the authority above it when the holder has defaulted and left no heir. The writ named a holding. The holding was earth. It named a debtor. The debtor was a thing called the Concord Assessment of the Third Survey, a name for humanity that no human had spoken in 200,000 years, a name assigned to us by an accountant who had looked at our world across an unimaginable gulf and decided what we were worth. It named a default. The default was dated. The date, converted into our reckoning, fell in the deep cold at the bottom of the long memory, in the years we call the guttering, when the sky had gone bad and the old orbital works had failed, and the first human civilization capable of answering the stars had come apart in famine and dark. And it named a claim. The claim was total. All fixtures, all improvements, all salvage, all massed down to the mantle. The Sedrach receivership was returning to take possession of an estate it had marked bankrupt while our ancestors were burning furniture to stay alive. Ost read it over my shoulder and said the thing that a young man says, which was, "They can't do that." "They believe they can," I said. "That is a different matter." I want to be exact about what the Sedrach believed, because their belief is the whole hinge of the thing, and if I fail to make you understand it, then nothing else I write will land. They did not believe they were attacking us. In their own record, and I have their record now, all of it, they left it behind. They had no reason to think we would ever read it. This was not an invasion. It was a foreclosure. 200,000 years before, a survey arm of the Sedrach had passed through our system, appraised it, extended what their instruments called an obligation of assessment, and finding the holder unable to meet it, had entered Earth into their ledgers as a lapsed account, written off, marked for eventual liquidation whenever a receivership circuit came back this way with the tonnage to do the work. They came back with the tonnage. To them we were a bad debt that had sat on the books for an age, an estate whose owner had died without heirs, a property gone to ruin and reverting at last to the firm that had first booked the loss. They expected to find what a foreclosing collector always expects to find at the bottom of a long default: nothing. A dead world. Cold cities under ice. Salvage. They came to take possession of a corpse and strip it, and they filed the paperwork first, because the Sedrach are nothing if not correct. I sent the notice up the concern within the hour, and by the second day the whole apparatus of us had turned to face it, and I learned very quickly that I was not going to be a bystander to this. The long concern has no single head. It has never had one. A thing meant to run past every human lifetime cannot be trusted to any one lifetime's judgment, and so we are governed the way a cathedral is built, by roles that outlast the people in them, by ledgers and charters and the slow weight of precedent. I hold the registry of Keeling Reach. That made me, by the oldest of those precedents, the officer of record for anything that arrived claiming the ground the reach stands on. The claim had arrived. It stood on my ground. It was mine to answer. I did not feel equal to it. I want that in the record too. I am a keeper of numbers. I am good at it, and I am proud of it in the quiet way a man is proud of a thing he has done well every day for a long time, but I had never in 61 years had to look at another people's foreclosure writ and decide how a civilization should reply. What steadied me was not courage. It was the ledger itself. I went down into the deep registry, the vault under the founding yards where the continuous record is kept, and I walked the aisles of it, and I let the sheer length of us press the panic flat. You must understand what is in that vault, because the Sedrach did not, and the not understanding is what undid them. The continuous record of the long concern is not a history. Historians tell you what happened. The record tells you what was made, and what it was made of, and who made it, and what they learned, and the record has no gaps. When the old sky civilization guttered out in the cold, it did not take the record with it, because by then the record was already the oldest thing we had, older than any nation, and the survivors carried it the way you carry the one thing you will not put down to save your own hands. They kept building through the guttering. They built small and they built badly, and half of what they built failed, and they wrote down the failures, and the next generation built on the failures, and so on, across the cold and out the other side of it, and up. 200,000 years is not a number the mind holds, so do not hold it as a number. Hold it as this, an unbroken chain of hands, each one taught by the hand before it, each one adding a piece to a work no one of them would live to see rise, each one writing down what they had done so the next hand would not have to learn it again. That is the long concern. It is not a government and it is not an army. It is the decision made once in the dark and never once unmade that we would keep working, that whatever else was taken from us the work would not stop. A firm, if you like, a firm for eternity. That was the joke the earliest keepers made about themselves in the cold when the joke was bitter. We are a firm for eternity and our only product is that we do not close. They said it to keep their hands moving. Their hands moved. Here I am. And here, on the 11th of Marrowtide, came the collectors of a debt none of us had ever heard of, to close the firm that had refused, for 2,000 centuries, to close itself. The ships arrived on the 4th day. I watched them come down through the high arrays and then, when they were low enough, through the long window of the registry, and I will tell you honestly that they were built to be feared and they were fearsome. The Sedrach do not build ugly. Their receivership tenders came in a slow descending column through the eastern sky, 40 of them, dark and ridged and patient, each one longer than a town, and they moved with the deliberate, weightless certainty of things that had done this many times before and expected no surprises. They spread over the coast in a wide arc, and the lead vessel, the bark of the factor himself, settled toward the founding yards of Keeling Reach as though it already owned the ground it was choosing to land on, which, by its own paperwork, it did. The factor's bark came down in the outer yard. In the flat poor field we keep clear for the walking of the largest trusses. And it put down its weight on our stone with a care that was almost courtesy, and then it opened. I went out to meet it, because that was my office, and I took with me only Ost and 2 others, a structural adjutant named Halla and an old woman named Sale, who holds the charter of precedent, and can recite 300 generations of it without a page in front of her. We 4 walked out across the poor field toward the bark under that same flat spring light, 4 people on foot on an expanse of stone the size of a plain, and I remember thinking that we must look to them like the last four caretakers of a ruin, come out to surrender the keys. That is exactly what they thought. I have read the factor's own log of the moment. He recorded us as residual custodial biologicals, low count, no defensive posture, and he noted, with what I can only call the satisfaction of a man whose expectations are being met, that the site showed activity consistent with automated legacy processes. Activity consistent with automated legacy processes. He meant the yards. He meant the gantries walking and the poor lines bright, and the 100,000 of us at our stations along the eastern arm, doing the morning's work. He looked at the largest continuous act of labor in the history of our species, and he wrote it down as machinery that no one had thought to switch off. The factor came down the ramp. The Sedrach are not humanoid, and I will not pretend they were, because the temptation in an account like this is to make the enemy a man in a mask, and the truth was stranger and worth the strangeness. The factor was a long segmented thing, chitinous, the color of old ledger leather, carried above the ground on many jointed legs so that he seemed always to be in the middle of a slow bow. His forebody rose into a cowl of hard plating from which a cluster of dark eyes regarded us, and beneath the eyes he carried, cradled in two refined foremost limbs that were clearly never meant for labor, a slab of dark material inlaid with light. The writ. He carried the writ the way a priest carries a relic. To him, it was the realest thing in the yard. He addressed us through a translation array his people had prepared, and I will give his words as they reached us, because they matter. I am Factor Oruset of the Sedrach Receivership 7th Circuit, he said. I hold the writ of escheat upon this holding, filed and standing. The debtor of record is in default of assessment, 200,000 years lapsed, no payment rendered, no heir presenting. By the writ I take possession of this estate in all its mass. You are recorded as residual custodians. You will be relocated. Present the register of fixtures and stand aside. He wanted the register of fixtures. That is a thing a collector asks for. When you foreclose on a property, you want its inventory. What is here? What it is worth? What can be stripped and what must be scrapped? He asked for our inventory the way a man asks a caretaker for the keys and the ledger before he changes the locks. I am the keeper of the register of fixtures. I want to tell you that in that moment I felt defiance, that something in me rose up. It did not. What I felt, standing on the poor field in the flat light with a foreclosure notice regarding me out of a cowl of dark eyes, was a kind of vast and level calm, and I have thought a great deal since about where it came from, and I think it came from the vault. I had walked the aisles of the record 2 days before. I knew what was in them. And I understood, standing there, that Factor Oruset had made a single error, and that it was not a small error, and that it was the only error that mattered, and that I was the man positioned to make him see it. He believed the account had closed. Everything he had done, the writ, the circuit, the 40 tenders, the courtesy of his landing, rested on that one belief. The debtor lapsed. The firm shut. The estate reverting. The firm had never shut. Factor Oruset, I said. I am Marn Callow. I hold the register you have asked for. I will present it to you gladly, and I will present the whole account with it, because I think you have come a very long way on the strength of a single line in your ledger, and I think you have not read the rest of the page. You have marked this estate abandoned. Before you relocate anyone, I ask you to do the one thing a collector is bound to do before he forecloses. I ask you to inspect the property. There was a pause in the array while his people rendered that. I watched the cluster of dark eyes, and I could read nothing in them, and I did not need to. Behind him, up the ridge, along the 9 climbing tiers of the eastern arm, the yards were working. He had his back to them. That is the detail I keep returning to. When he made his claim, Factor Oruset had his back to the thing that was going to end his claim, and he did not know it was there, because his instruments had told him it was legacy automation, and he had believed his instruments, the way we all believe the ledgers we trust. The property is inspected, he said. The survey is complete. The site shows ruined state consistent with 200,000 years of custodial decay. There is nothing here to inspect that alters the writ. Then walk the property with me, I said. A collector who forecloses without walking the ground is a poor collector factor, and I do not think you are a poor collector. I think you are a careful one. Walk the eastern arm with me. It will take an hour. If at the end of the hour you still hold that this estate is abandoned and reverting, I will present you the register myself and stand my people aside, and you will have your foreclosure with our full cooperation and no blood. If at the end of the hour you do not, you will do the correct thing, which is what your own law binds you to, and I think correctness is the thing you serve above all. An hour. Walk with me. I do not know to this day why he agreed. I have theories. The kindest is that he was, as I had guessed, a careful collector, and that the offer of full cooperation at the end appealed to the part of him that wanted this to be clean. The truest, I think, is simpler and colder. He agreed because he was certain, and a certain man will walk any ground you like, because he knows what he will find. He agreed the way a man agrees to count money he is sure is his. We walked the eastern arm. I took him up the founding yards on foot, the four of us and the factor and a detail of his own. 6 of the segmented soldiers, hard-shelled, each cradling a weapon I did not pretend to understand, and I walked slowly, and I let the reach speak for itself, because I have kept its ledger for 61 years, and I know that nothing I could say would weigh a tenth of what the ground would say if I only gave it time. We started at the poor lines. I stopped him at the first casting floor, where a crew of 200 was drawing a spar off the molds, a single poured member 40 meters long that would go, that afternoon, into the seaward truss. I let him watch them draw it. I let him watch the crew chief walk its length with a resonance wand, listening to the metal for flaws, and I let him watch her mark its sound, and I let him watch the lift frame take it up and carry it away toward the sea. And then I said quietly, "That spar has a serial. The serial is in my register. It is the 4,112,600,000th structural member cast at this site. We have the number because we have never stopped counting. The first member cast here was poured by hand, in a cold that would kill your soldiers, by people who did not have a word for the thing they were building. We have the record of that pour too. Would you like the number of that one? It is 1. He said nothing. We walked on. I took him past the reservoirs, the great terrace tanks that climbed the ridge, and I told him their capacity, and I told him that the topmost of them had been filling and drawing for 11,000 years, and had never once been drained, because to drain it would be to stop, and we do not stop. I took him past the hab-tiers, where the people of the reach live stacked in their tens of thousands, and I let him see the schools, and I stopped at a school, and I let him see a room of children being taught the record, not history, the record, the making of things, a child of 6 with a resonance wand of her own, learning to listen to a length of metal for the flaw in it. She will do this for 80 years, I said, and then she will teach it, and the one she teaches will teach it, and none of them will ever see the reach finished, because it is not the kind of thing that finishes. Do you understand yet what you are looking at, factor? You mark this estate abandoned. You are walking through the busiest room in the history of my species." He did not answer, but he had begun, I noticed, to hold the writ differently. When we started, he had carried it before him, forward presented, the way you carry a thing you are about to use. By the reservoirs he had drawn it in against his forebody. By the school he was holding it the way a man holds a paper he is no longer sure he wants read aloud. We came out at last onto the high gallery of the eastern arm, the one that looks north along the whole seaward face of the reach, and there I stopped, because there was nothing more I needed to say, and because from the high gallery you can see all of it at once, and all of it at once is an argument no ledger of theirs could answer. The reach ran north from us for 90 kilometers along the coast, 9 tiers climbing the ridge, and every tier was working. The gantries walked. The poor lines burned. The lift frames carried their trusses out to the growing edge, where the seaward face was rising still, course on course, into the flat spring light, exactly as it had risen every day for 200,000 years and would rise, if we had our way, for 200,000 more. And out beyond the growing edge, at anchor in the deep water, the sea fleet lay, the long gray continuity ships that carry the record and the crews and the castings between the reaches, hull after hull after hull. More of them than the factor had brought tenders, and past them, small with distance and high in the pale sky, the daylight glint of the orbital works, the rings and the platforms and the slow crossing stations that we had never stopped adding to either, up there, above the weather-patient hours. I did not point at any of it. I let him look. He looked for a long time. His soldiers had stopped, all 6 of them, and they were looking too, and I saw the thing happen in them that I had come out onto the field hopping to make happen, the thing that is the whole point of this account and the whole point, I have come to think, of who we are. It was not fear. I want to be precise because it would be easy to write that they were afraid, and it would be a lie, and worse than a lie it would be small. They were not afraid. They were something graver than afraid. They had come an unthinkable distance across an age, carrying a paper that said this world was a corpse and their firm had come to claim it, and they were standing on the corpse and it was the most alive thing any of them had ever seen, and the paper in the factor's forelimbs was, they were all of them realizing at once, worth exactly nothing. Not because we had torn it up, because it had never been true. You cannot foreclose on a firm that did not close. There was no default. There had never been a default. There had only been, at the bottom of a cold 200,000 years gone, a handful of people who had decided not to stop, and every hand since. And the ground the factor stood on was the proof, 90 kilometers of it, burning bright in the morning, and he had walked its whole length, and he could not make it be a ruin no matter how his instruments had it filed. Factor Orused stood on the high gallery of the eastern arm with the writ of a sheet drawn in against his forebody, and he looked north along the working length of the long concern, and into the array quietly. He said one word, and the array rendered it, and the word was, when. I said, that is the right question. That is the only question, Factor. You want to know when the account closed so you can tell me the default is real. It did not close. That is the whole of my answer, and it is the whole of the register you asked me for. Your survey passed through here in the cold 200,000 years ago, and it looked at a people burning their furniture to live, and it wrote us down as lapsed, and it moved on. It was not wrong about the cold. It was wrong about the closing. We did not close. We have never closed. We were open the day your survey passed, and we were open every day since, and we are open now, and your writ is filed against a firm that is standing here doing business. There is no estate to revert. There is no default to collect. You have come a very long way, and I am sorry for it, because it is a great deal of work to come so far to collect a debt that was paid every single day for 200,000 years in the only currency that was ever owed, which is that we kept the work going. Look at the payment. It is 90 kilometers long. It is behind you and it is in front of you, and it goes up past the weather into the sky. The account is settled, Factor. It was settled continuously. Read the rest of the page. Now here is the part I set down most carefully, because it is the part that matters most, and it is the part where a lesser people would have failed. We could have destroyed them. I want that plainly in the record, because it is true, and because the restraint means nothing if you do not first believe the power was real. The orbital works the factor had glinting in his high sky were not ornaments. The continuity ships at anchor were not barges. 200,000 years of unbroken making does not produce only reservoirs and schools. It produces, as the quiet byproduct of never stopping, a capacity that a firm of 40 foreclosure tenders cannot survive contact with, and the factor, standing on the high gallery, had by then understood that too. His soldiers had understood it. Every instrument they carried was, I am certain, screaming it at them. They had landed 40 ships on the doorstep of something that could have unmade them between one breath and the next, and had chosen, so far, not to. And they knew we knew. That is the moment the whole thing turns on, not the moment they saw the yards. The moment they understood that we saw them see the yards, and that we had not moved. Because we do not gloat, and we do not cackle, and we do not. When a mistaken collector stands on our ground with a worthless paper, make him pay in blood for a clerk's error 2,000 centuries old. That is not who 200,000 years of keeping the work going makes you. It makes you patient, and patience is not the same as mercy, but it wears the same face. I had no wish to kill Factor Oru said. I had a wish to close his account and send him home correctly, so that it would be settled and stay settled, and never be filed against us again. So I did the collector's own thing back to him. I think that is why it landed the way it did. I met him inside his own law. Give me the writ, I said. He hesitated. Of course he hesitated. And this is the measure of him, and the reason I do not in the end hold him in contempt. He extended the 2 refined forelimbs, and he gave me the writ of a sheet, the slab of dark material inlaid with light, filed and standing, the paper he had carried across an age. He gave it to me because he was, as I had guessed on the poor field, a man who served correctness above everything, and correctness in the end is a thing you can reason with. A people who serve only appetite you must fight. A people who serve correctness you can, if you are patient, simply show the correct answer and trust them to be what they claim to be. I took the writ. I did not break it. Breaking it would have been a gesture, and we are not a people of gestures. We are a people of records. I held it, and I called for Sale, who holds the charter of precedent, and I asked her to render into their array the finding of record. And she did, in her old dry voice, 300 generations of precedent behind it, and it was very short, because the true answer to a great question is usually short. Finding of the long concern entered this day, she said. The holding named in the writ of escheat is not in default. The debtor of record has been in continuous operation without lapse for the entire term of the alleged default. The obligation, if any obligation existed, has been met in full and continuously by the fact of that operation. There is no lapsed account. There is no reverting estate. The writ is void, not by our refusal, but by its own error of fact. The account is marked settled. It was never otherwise. Then I gave the writ back to him. That is the thing I did that I am, in my small way, most satisfied with. I did not keep it as a trophy. I did not destroy it as a defiance. I handed Factor Oru said back his own foreclosure notice, void on its face, marked settled, so that he could carry it home to his firm and file it correctly and close the circuit, and never send another tender back this way to collect a debt that was paid every morning for 200,000 years. I closed his account for him. It was the most useful thing I could do, and the most final, and it cost no one a single life. And it is, I have come to believe, exactly what a firm for eternity is for. He took it back. He held it a long moment in the refined forelimbs. And then Factor Oru said did a thing I did not expect and have thought about every day since. He lowered his forebody, the whole long segmented length of him, down toward the stone of the gallery, in what his people's own record, which I have read, calls the posture of a corrected account. It is not a bow of submission. It is more particular than that and more to their credit. It is the posture a salvage collector takes when he has been shown that a debt he came to collect was already paid, an acknowledgment, formal, that the error was his firm's and not the debtor's, and that the debtor is owed, in place of the payment, an apology of record. He held it a moment. Then he rose, and he turned at last, and he looked north along the working length of the reach one more time, with the whole of it burning in the flat spring light. And into the array, quietly, he said the thing that I have kept at the very front of the ledger ever since, the last entry of that day. We marked this world closed, he said, because we could not imagine anyone would keep the doors open so long with no one coming to pay them. We were not wrong about the cold. We were wrong about you, 200,000 years. A pause in the array. I will file it settled, and I will tell my firm the truth of why, so the truth is in the record where you keep everything. You did not defeat a collector today, registrar. You showed him an account he did not know how to read. That is worse for us, and better for you than any defeat. Then the salvage receivership, 7th Circuit, 40 tenders and a factor who served correctness above his appetite, lifted off the coast of a world it had come to foreclose and did not, and went back up through the eastern sky the way it had come, in a slow ascending column, and left our stone the way it had found it, which is to say working, and I stood on the high gallery of the eastern arm until the last of them was a glint above the weather and then gone. I went back down into the vault that evening, when the yards had shifted to the night cruise and the pour lines burned against a dark sky, and I entered the day into the continuous record with my own hand, the way I have entered 41,000 completed works in 61 years. I did not enter it as a battle, because it was not won. I did not enter it as a victory, because we do not keep those. A victory is a thing that is finished, and we do not deal in finished things. I entered it under the only heading that was true. I entered it as a work completed, the oldest work, the one the earliest keepers set their hands to in the cold, when the joke was bitter and their hands moved anyway, a firm for eternity whose only product is that it does not close. We kept the doors open. On the 11th of Marrowtide, 200,000 years into keeping them open, a collector came to tell us we had closed, and we walked him the length of the proof that we had not, and we handed him back his paper marked settled, and we sent him home. And then, because it was evening and the night cruise were on, and there was a trust to walk out to the seaward face before the tide turned, we went back to work. There is no other ending to a story about us. That is the ending. We went back to work.